Hey, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for joining us again on the special series on running for office. Today, we're back here with Aaron Straus Garcia. So welcome again, Aaron. Thanks for joining us.
Hey,
And
thanks for having me.
yeah, of course. And we're going to talk a little bit today about what GOTV is and leading up to Election Day, what are some of the things that you need to be working on? And then we're going to switch over and talk a little bit about what to do on Election Day. And so, Aaron, I'm just going to kick this right over to you. What is GOTV and why is it so important for a campaign?
Great. Thank you. GOTV is Get Out the Vote. And it's important to a campaign because in order to win an election, you need votes and you need to turn out people who support you to go to the polls and vote for you. Um, it's not it's not a given that someone who expressed support for your campaign and for your candidacy is necessarily going to go to the polls on election day and vote for you. So GOTV is all about turning out voters and all of the steps in the final days and on election day that are required to maximize your resources and your effort towards the singular goal of getting more votes than the other campaign. And you're doing that specifically by focusing on the people that support you and focusing on making sure that they are going to the polls and using data as much as possible throughout the process to really, again, like maximize your resources and make sure you're going about your outreach and engagement with voters in the most efficient way possible.
Great. So what are some of the things that people should be thinking about before Election Day to make sure they're set up for Election Day properly?
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, data's big, and you really want to be thinking about getting to a GOTV universe. We talk a lot about voter universes, and that's just kind of populations of voters that fit a specific criteria, and that list may live in your voter file. And essentially, your GOTV universe are people that your campaign has identified as definitely or strong supporters and that you want to turn out, because when you turn them out, the more voters you turn out for your campaign, the likelier you are to win. And you can actually get very specific doing an analysis of previous elections, seeing what turnout was in previous elections for your office, and taking in some of the other variables in your race and kind of understanding what your win number is, how many votes you're going to need to get in order to beat your opponents. And then you can kind of work backwards from that number and figure out, I want to get 3 times more than the necessary, than what I think the necessary number of votes are going to be. And that's your GOTV universe right there. That list of people that is, overcompensating for your win number. That's kind of where you part from. How do you create that GOTV universe? Well, assuming that you've been doing persuasion and running a field campaign in the weeks and months leading up to your election, you've been knocking on doors and making phone calls and working through your voter file to persuade voters using call scripts and canvassing scripts and sending out volunteers to say, hey, here's why this candidate is the best candidate in the race. Do you support them? Most canvassing or call scripts will have that question, and volunteers should be marking that down. So you're saving the responses from your persuasion period into your voter file. You're updating those if you're talking to voters more than one time, which hopefully you are, and you're working to get to a GOTV universe of, all of these people have expressed support in my campaign for my campaign. These are the people that I want to contact during the GOTV period, which we'll get to in a second. Like, how do you define that? The one thing I'll say is many campaigns, particularly local campaigns, don't get to contact every single voter that they would need to far surpass their win number, to have a GOTV list of voters that is like, these people have confirmed that they support me, or they're leaning towards supporting me, and these are the people we need to turn out on election day. That list, if you weren't doing a very robust persuasion field effort, it may be smaller than the actual total number of votes that you need to get. If that's the case, don't panic, because your consultants, your mail consultant, other people that are working with you on the race should be able to, in the same way they kind of came up with that win number by doing analysis of previous races, they should be able to work within the voter file to get you a GOTV universe of people who are more likely to support your race. Another way to do it is by a lot of local campaigns might do a poll. They might actually hire a polling firm to gauge people's support, and from that sample, extrapolate a GOTV audience for you, a GOTV universe. So these are some of the ways that people get to their voter universe, but ideally, you're heading into the GOTV period with a list of people that you are confident will support your campaign, and those are your targets for you to turn out on election day.
Right, because really the whole idea here, to some extent, is you want to maximize the campaign's resources, right, as far as what kind of impact you're having on what voters. So even though it's unfortunate, and this is a side note and maybe a conversation for another episode, going into sort of the impacts on our civic and political system, when that campaigns are really focused on the voters that are more likely or most likely to come out for them, you're not, unless you have the kind of funding and time to register new voters or to move people from a different party or something like that, try to get the hard to reach voters, you really want to triage this, right? And kind of focus on the people that are going to be the best bang for your buck as far as your time is concerned, because you're going to be limited in your resources on most campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so people are working on this. They are doing their persuasion. They're talking to people about all their great ideas for what they want to do in office, and now they've started to build this universe of voters that might come out for them. At what point, in the campaign, are you moving? And is it a sort of cut and dry? How do you move from persuasion to the sort of GOTV time period? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, typically I've seen, more professional campaigns run GOTV style efforts for 3 to 5 days leading up to election day. And then election day is essentially, a GOTV day on steroids. And GOTV is really just, it's the fact that you're targeting your GOTV universe through field efforts. You're only targeting your GOTV universe. Persuasion has stopped, and it might have stopped long before GOTV. So it's who you're talking to, plus a very intensified pace of your regular field activities. So your regular field activities, which consist of canvassing and phone banking, and now in the age of pandemic, certainly, relational organizing or social media canvassing, that sort of effort might factor in as well. But essentially, assuming you've already been doing this as part of your campaign, and you should have been doing it, as we've covered in some of our previous conversations. You just need a lot more of it, because you've got a really big list of potential supporters in your GOTV universe that you have to get through multiple times, and that's a lot more. You have a very short period of time to do that, so you want more volunteers knocking on doors, more volunteers making phone calls, field experts working on your campaign, consultants working on your campaign are going to help inform how many passes through your GOTV universe you probably need to be safe, to ensure that you're turning all of these people out. And when I say a pass, I just mean like, we talked to this person. So you're actually trying to, in an ideal world, you're actually trying to talk to every single one of your targeted voters multiple times before election day. And that is going to require a lot of boots on the ground. And so you need to start thinking about GOTV far in advance of the actual GOTV period. And you need to start doing specific volunteer recruitment for it. And the way that on some of the campaigns that I've worked on, the way that we start recruiting for GOTV and planning for GOTV is really looking at that total GOTV universe number and thinking about, what's realistic, how many passes can we do through it, right? So, let's just work with simple numbers because I'm very bad at math. Assuming we have, 3,000 people in our GOTV universe and we want to, get through that universe 3 times, right? We actually have 9,000 voter contacts to make before election day. And, thinking about, how many voter contacts one of your volunteers can make on average in a voter contact shift, right? We have to like divide that big number by how many shifts you need to fill, right? A shift being a 3-hour, phone calling or door knocking session where a volunteer is going to, ideally be able to reach, 30 to 60 people, something like that, knock on 100 doors. So you start to think about those numbers and you realize, oh my God, I have hundreds of volunteer shifts I need to fill. And I'm going to basically put those shifts on the calendar and say, there's a 10 a.m. shift, maybe one of your GOTV days is a weekend, you can get away with 3 shifts in the day. But basically just trying to slot people in and really starting a month out and getting people to commit to participate in your GOTV efforts a month out, and commit to filling voter contact shifts. So that's really, as part of that, you may, because assuming that you're doing a robust field effort leading into GOTV, you already have volunteers who are showing up to do canvassing and phone banking. And, it's going to take a lot more than what you probably have currently. So you want to bring all those people in. You want to have a meeting where you're going to talk about, how intense it's going to be, what the shifts are, how to share the numbers with them, let them in a little bit on the strategy because that creates more buy-in. Maybe designate some, geographic points in the district or in the town or in the county that you're running in, as like these are the GOTV rally points. These are where people are going to be able to get their materials and get some training and get some instruction. So really, do as much as you can to kind of map it out in advance and share that strategy with your volunteers because they're going to go out and help you recruit for this big effort.
That's great. And so that's some good timeline there and some other good thoughts. Now, for someone who's never done GOTV before, could you walk us through a little bit of like what's the difference between a call script if you are doing persuasion versus GOTV?
That's
what's
a
the
great
difference
question.
between those two things?
So I think the script is going to be simpler. Election day is this Tuesday, and we need voters to turn out. You may not have a script that sort of assumes that the person you're talking to is supporting your candidate. You may, depending on the race, but it's really about turnout. It's really about in some efforts now there's a lot of early voting. We saw in this election, many states did early voting. When I worked on the Obama campaign in North Carolina back in 2008, it was the first general election cycle that the state was doing early voting. So part of our strategy was turning our supporters out during the early vote period to reduce that GOTV universe for election day, to actually make our election day work easier on ourselves. And so one of the questions that we were asking was, have you already voted? Have you voted early? Same thing with mail-in ballots. So there may be some fact finding involved in your GOTV scripts because you're actually actively, taking people off of your list who have already voted. Certainly on election day, you're trying to do that. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But really the script is just focused on general election day awareness and asking people if they intend to vote.
Great, great. And so that's very different than a persuasion script that's going to talk about the candidate and the issues in the community and things like
Absolutely,
that.
and arming your volunteers with talking points on the issues, and trying to actually win them over.
Right. Now, if you've got really good data, right, if people are, if the folks that are making the calls and doing the door knocking are keeping track of topics of conversations, or anything like that, things that the individual voter they're talking to is interested in, are those things that are worth bringing up in the GOTV time period? If you have any more sort of specific or targeted data, if you have notes on conversations that already happened with the person, should you try to
Absolutely,
think about
absolutely.
that?
I've seen that. I've seen that. Particularly if there are sort of late breaking current events in the community or writ large that may galvanize people. You can certainly arm your volunteers with talking points to kind of get people energized, for sure.
Okay, cool. And is there anything else that you wanted to talk to kind of in the lead up to election day?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, visibility, I think, is another important factor in GOTV, depending on the race, depending on, where you're running. Certainly lots of differences between urban, suburban, and rural campaigning. But, visibility is making folks aware that there's an election, making folks aware that your campaign is running. I think you see a lot of campaigns doing visibility through yard signs. Yard signs we were taught on the Obama campaign that yard signs don't vote. And so there was a kind of a de-emphasizing of yard signs as a method of communicating support. Lots of voters love yard signs. They want to have a yard sign on their lawn. So I recommend making yard signs available, but not driving yourself crazy about getting them into the hands of your supporters. I've seen yard signs work really well as a volunteer recruitment tool. As a if you have a base of support that's hungry for yard signs, making people sign up for a volunteer shift to get one, or simply just tracking, who has one as a way of measuring support in your various communities and doing volunteer outreach later. Another good method for visibility are events. Finding a central location in your community during GOTV close to election day, and setting it up as a staging location for canvassing efforts, but putting up signs and banners and making sure that the community knows that, hey, the campaign is here and they're organizing and they're going out and canvassing the community, and we see them. And we did that, Alex,
Hmm.
when you ran for mayor. We had a great staging location, I remember, right in the center of town,
Yeah.
and we were doing
Spiota Park and
canvassing.
then down at the train
Yeah,
station. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and people were showing up and organizing, and going, getting their walk lists and leaving, and the community sees that, and the community can feel that energy. And I do not discount that those events helped put you over the top. um,
Yeah, I agree, especially if you think about the community that you're running for office in and you have high traffic areas. One of the things that candidates often do, I mean, Aaron, tell me if you disagree with this, but I think candidates sometimes when they think about, they think about where to find groups of people that are coming out of somewhere, but like a train station is a good example. You don't know what town those people live in. You don't know if they're registered to vote. You don't really know anything about them versus when you're knocking on doors, you're going off a voter file where you have actually a lot of information about them. And so sometimes I've seen candidates where they put a lot of attention on those areas, which is not necessarily going to net you a lot on the voter side, but it may net you on this side, especially if you're a challenger candidate like I was,
that's
right?
exactly right. That's exactly right. You don't want to look at uh, handing out flyers at a train station as a method of voter contact during GOTV. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it as part of your visibility campaign. And I think that one way to think about it is, maybe if you're thinking about all of your overall campaign efforts during GOTV, as close as you can get to having, 80% of those be field, they should be. And then maybe there's, a 10% that's dedicated to visibility, and another 10% that's dedicated to some of the other things I'm going to talk about in a second, and just general administration that is required for any campaign. I think that's one way to look at, how you want to prioritize your GOTV efforts.
And I think there's a difference, and tell me again if you disagree here, that if you're an established incumbent candidate versus a challenger candidate, or if you're running off a party line, for example, things like lawn signs, that I would agree 100% that it's worth having them available, but not worth going crazy with them. But if you're a challenger candidate, we talked about this in some of the earlier episodes too, it is worth making sure that when people look at your campaign, whether they're looking at your website or the lit materials that you're handing out or anything like that, that you've got a solid kind of professional presence so people take the campaign seriously. And lawn signs, even though, you could kind of argue that social media to some degree replaces that a little bit, because people will post, and we did this in South Orange, is, we had people post, change their social media profile pictures, like on Facebook, for example, to a frame that was about my campaign. We did some things like that. That was really great, especially when you're in a smaller town like that.
Yeah.
But don't discount the lawn signs. People are driving around town, and if you're a challenger, and it's a bit of a prisoner's dilemma, right? If your opponent has a whole bunch up, then, and you're a challenger candidate, you're going to look like you don't really have much going on if you don't have them. But if your opponent's not really doing a lot with them, don't drive yourself crazy trying to get a lawn sign in every lawn.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think that's what you mentioned about changing the Facebook profile picture. That is a good segue to some of the other activities that you certainly don't want to forget about during GOTV while you're emphasizing, and putting a vast majority of your resources and efforts into field. And social media is one of those. And I think that having some very coordinated efforts to increase visibility on social media during GOTV. And if you can funnel that into filling volunteer shifts during GOTV, you absolutely should. But you should have someone on your team that's thinking about, what are we sharing each day of GOTV? What's the meme? What's the picture? What's the copy on Facebook? We should boost it. We should put a little money behind it, and we should get all of our supporters who are active on social media to like it. Do the same on Twitter. Use a hashtag, but get everybody in the community, focused on seeing your candidate and your campaign during GOTV. And if you can include a link to like hey, we're out in the community knocking on doors, letting people know that this election is on Tuesday. Sign up for a volunteer shift. Like, that is a perfect ask to go along with that post. Your mail campaign is going to be in full swing. So one thing that I think is important is making all of your volunteers that are out knocking on doors and talking to voters over the phone during GOTV aware of what the mail is and what it says, because there's nothing worse than having a volunteer be confronted about a piece of mail, particularly if it's a negative piece of mail, which I don't like advise my candidates to really run negative mail campaigns, but I know some consultants do, and I know it's very much dependent on what kind of race you're in as well. If you have a specific issue, it may not be negative per se, but you need to draw contrast on an issue with your opponent. It's just very important to make sure that volunteers are cognizant of what messages are out there and what they may be confronted with while they're on the doors and out in the community. So definitely make sure that you're working closely with your consultants on that piece. And then lastly is media and press outreach. Certainly, you want to get some coverage. This is your biggest opportunity for any sort of earned media coverage about your campaign to be effective, right? And to actually sway people remind people that you're running, turn out your supporters. So as much as you can do in the final days to secure some positive media coverage, I think that's very important. If there is, any sort of contrasts or negativity in the race, being aware of what might be out there, again, to the earlier point about making sure volunteers know what kind of messages are being sent in the mail so that they can be prepared. Same thing with any articles that might be out there. I remember when I was helping my friend run for town council, she was running on a slate, and one of her co-candidates there was a negative story that the opposition was able to place in the local paper that mattered. So that weekend when we were running GOTV, the headline, one of the leading stories in the local paper was about, some discrepancy in some contracting work that one of her, folks that she was running with had. And it was, it wasn't huge, but it was enough that there were some questions, and it wasn't a great story to have, 3 days before the election, and people were definitely asking about it. And I remember there were volunteers that were, coming back and asking us what they should say, and they hadn't been prepared with the appropriate talking points. So that's just something to keep in mind, that there obviously will be an uptick in chatter about the race and coverage about the race, and just being aware of what those narratives are, so you can prepare people when they're talking to voters, is very important.
And the flip side of that too is that is this a good time also that if you have supporters who want to declare their public support for you, that's something that maybe could have been done throughout the campaign, but the op-eds or now
Letter
people,
to the editor,
making a video,
for sure.
right? Those things, you could have some of those ready as you lead up to the election in case there are some negative things that come out at the last minute.
Definitely.
And it's a good way if people are willing to put their name kind of out there, which not everybody is, and that should be, sort of understandable. But if people are, that's a nice thing for them to get to do.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. So, So we've covered some good topics here. Is there anything else on the sort of leading up to Election Day side of things?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, well, I guess enthusiasm. I guess, people are going to be tired, and making sure that, your campaign office or your staging locations, or, wherever volunteers are, getting together and organizing and mingling with campaign staff or the candidate, depending on the size of your race, that environment is fun and energetic and, collegial, and making people feel, amped up. In North Carolina back in '08, we had the best campaign offices. We had people bringing food, and there was music, and there was, beer and wine in the evenings. And I just remember it was like the place where people wanted to be. And I think that that's really important to try to create a campaign that sets that sort of tone, because especially during GOTV, you're asking people to go and spend hours, walking neighborhoods and knocking on doors, and then you're asking them to come back and do it the next day. So you really want to, make sure that you're thinking about ways that you can keep the energy up.
I don't think my apartment on First Street ever quite made it to that milestone. But
we had some fun nights.
We did, and there was certainly plenty of pizza for everybody. But that might have been it. But I do remember. I mean, you mentioned something about kind of pace and enthusiasm. I remember, in some of those final days, going door to door, and I had my walk list on the front of a clipboard, and I had a call sheet on the back of the clipboard. And between the houses, if they were spaced far enough apart that I had 30 or 40 seconds between the house, I would just make a phone call. And so I'm trying to fill, every second in with reaching out to people. These were people that I had already spoken to, just confirming that I had their support and that they knew when Election Day was. Because I'll say this, which was certainly a learning experience for mine. I mean, I think, for those of us who, have, kind of been engaged in some sort of civic things for a long time, it's hard to remember that there are a lot of people who this is not, a part of their daily life at all, or weekly life or monthly life. And I remember, you think about this when I was running in South Orange in 2011, there was less than a 10% turnout in the election. And so 90% of people in South Orange didn't have an opinion one way or the other on a 23-year-old about to take hold of the government. And I can understand being pro or against, but it's hard to understand not even caring. And I do remember a number of people's houses that I went to, they didn't know there was an election happening, and some of them did want to participate, and they were thankful for the information. But a lot of people are not. You're going to be in the middle of all of this as the candidate, right? You're going to be steeped in this stuff from morning till night, and just remembering that not everybody else is like that. And
I guess that's a good, like, one other topic is like, how should we're talking a lot about volunteers. How should the candidate be spending their time? And, my recommendation would be, the candidate becomes a super volunteer,
Right.
because the candidate is going to be your best asset in the field. And the candidate's going to be able to turn out more people and convince more people than anybody else. So I would, especially in a local race, I would keep the candidate knocking on doors and showing up to the visibility events and just trying to talk to as many people as possible, but doing so in a focused way, working off of that GOTV list as much as possible.
And I'll say, I'll certainly share from my own experience as a candidate here, is it was really helpful to have a volunteer, a friend with me, in large part to stop me from having hour-long conversations in people's kitchen about philosophy of government, which is really not the right place or time for that. And so that might be something worth thinking about too. And that could be a good way for some of the volunteers, if you're trying to kind of connect with them a little bit more, they might enjoy spending a couple hours with the candidate. That really helps as far as keeping the candidate on track. If questions come up, it's a little easier to kind of note things down for follow-ups, collect people's information and things like that. So that's one last thought there. Cool. So, all right. So we've talked a little bit about GOTV to get out the vote. We've talked a little bit about putting that universe together of all of the different individuals that you will want to come vote for you on election day. We talked a little bit about how to organize that from a field perspective and how to involve volunteers who are really going to be the key to the success of your GOTV efforts. We talked about how you sort of switch over from persuading voters to support you to making sure the voters are going to come vote for you somewhere around a couple days or so before the election is actually happening. And that ideally you're going into that with really good data that you collected from the prior weeks and months about who your supporters actually are. We talked a little bit about making sure that all these activities are really as visible as possible. So even if there are areas like the train station where you might not be actually doing good voter targeting, you're still out there with banners and signs and t-shirts and music and anything that you can do. Make sure to go to your local, whatever the government is that oversees that space, and make sure you register with it and kind of follow all the rules and stuff too. We talked a little bit about mail and media and social media leading up to the election and building a little bit of momentum or support that way as well. And just remember, a like on a Facebook page is not a vote in the polling place. And so you really want to be working off that voter file that Aaron mentioned. Then we talked a little bit about the candidate and making sure that the candidate is really doing what they need to be doing during GOTV, which is being out talking to voters and making sure that you're sort of supporting your volunteers who are really going to be putting in a lot of hours at this point. So, Aaron, thank you for all that information. And in a moment, we will jump into the day that we've all been waiting for, Election Day.